In part one, we saw that Timothy O'Connor's views on agent causation included the idea that objects have properties, and these properties are what give it its causal power. So that humans are unique, though, distinct from all the other objects in nature, because we have a few kinds of properties that we have control over their causal powers in terms of when they are causally active. And that is included in agent causation. In part two here, we're looking at some problems, some objections in O'Connor's responses that help us explicate his view more thoroughly. So the first objection to consider is a dilemma posed initially by Donald Davidson to any libertarian and who takes an agent causal theory. And the dilemma is either the causing by an agent of a primitive action is a further event itself that's distinct from that primitive action, or it's not. And the dilemma is this, right? If it is a further event, then you have two possibilities. Either the primitive action was not really primitive because there's this event prior to that, so that's problematic, or there's a causing that's not a doing. And since we're talking about the context of action and free will, that's going to be incoherent. Now, the other horn of the dilemma is if it's not a further event, then there really doesn't seem to be any causation at all. And so this is the challenge to O'Connor. I think it seems obvious, though, that O'Connor's going to take that second horn of the dilemma. He's certainly not going to say there's a further event. So it's got to be the second horn. And he claims that production of an eternal event causing the effect, that is, the subject's production of that event effect, is the primitive mental action. It's a primitive mental action. Now, okay, he's established that. What about this concern of Davidson? Then there doesn't seem to be any causation. And O'Connor says, look, this relational complex between the agent and the effect being caused, that's what constitutes the action itself. So just to be clear here on what's going on, we have this idea that the agent brings about actions at will. And since that's the case, you can't have a sufficient causal condition for an agent causal event. It just doesn't make sense to even ask for one, argues O'Connor. Now, that doesn't mean you don't have reasons for the event. You still can have reasons, explanations. They can still be consistent with agent causal theories, but these reasons don't influence the actions by causally producing them on their own, so to speak. So that's how he gets by that first objection, right? It's not a further event. It is the agent causing the effect. That's the event itself. Okay, second objection. This comes from Galen Strawson. And if the agent's viewed as a judge about how to act, okay, which is what O'Connor is suggesting here, based on, for example, motive A or motive B, so you're thinking about going skiing or going surfing, you have different motives for both of those things. To borrow another example, there must be a further determining factor involving motives that pushes one right towards A or towards B, and those were settled by the same kinds of process, and this is going to produce an infinite regress, right? If those are settled by some kind of process, then you have this other process going on, and you got to have an explanation for that. And so we have this infinite regress of causals, connections, and that's not going to make sense, of course, with finite human beings. So how does O'Connor respond to this challenge of the infinite regress? Well, he says, look, somebody could have some reasons for doing A. Suppose you have a reason to go to graduate school, and you also have some reasons for doing B. You have some reasons for taking a certain job. And without further considerations, you simply act on A reasons. You do A, right? You just go to graduate school. You make that decision. You don't have to have previous factors involved. Now, that's a more lengthy process typically, but this could be much shorter term. You have reasons to spend time with one person. You have reasons to spend time with another person on the same evening, and you just make the decision and you go to spend time with the one person instead of the other. You don't have to have these further factors involved that determine which of those actions are being chosen, right? And a lot of times there's no single obvious rational thing to do. So even when we ponder something for a long time, like whether to go to grad school or take a job, there still is no single obvious rational thing to do, and we've got to make a choice, right? Maybe there are limitations on when your applications are due or when you have to accept the job. So you have to make a choice, and in those situations, whatever choice you make, you do have reasons for making that choice, right? And this could be multiple decisions as well. I mean, there are multiple options. There might be a third option that you have a reason to take as well. And in these situations, the choice may be free. It's not determined. It was indeterminate until you made the choice. And it's reasons-based. You had reasons for doing it, even if it wasn't necessitated by the reasons, right? It wasn't obvious what to do. But then, of course, once the choice is made, it is the reasons that are determining what action you took. You do have those reasons for the action. Okay, what if we press this a little bit more? So one might ask, well, if neither A nor B was determined, right, how can reasons for A be explanatory if it was still possible that one would have done B, right? How can you consider that explanatory? It seems like you need an explanation as to why one didn't do B, but instead did A. Now, O'Connor's response to this is to say, this is to ask for the impossible. This is to ask the agent causal theorist to provide what can't be provided, right? To expect a sufficient explanation for doing A rather than B is to assume that there's some necessary cause, that is a cause that brings about A, right, necessarily, for doing A. But that's unintelligible, right? The agent causal theory says this is indeterminate up to the point when the agent causes the action to be done. And so it seems like it's to assume some sort of determinism, something like determinism, at least within the range of human actions, which is exactly what the libertarian rejects. So it's to assume that your view is correct, the objector's view is correct, and to demand the libertarian to fit into a determinist theory. And that's, of course, incoherent. So this objection is an unreasonable objection. Okay, now, one other thing to wrap up here, that O'Connor maintains that agent causation is consistent with reasons explanation, and this is consistent with science. So let's think about this consistency with reasons explanation. So you have the agent, you have the subject S, there's a desire for a state of affairs that be obtained. So let's just say that the person pondering grad school or taking a job goes to grad school. That desire was there, the desire to be applying to and to go to grad school was there. And so the subject acted in a way that would satisfy the antecedent desire. They accepted the offer to grad school. We'll assume we're at that point, right? And so that was clear what they needed to do to fulfill the desire, right? Now, prior to that action, S had this desire that B, right, to go to grad school, and believed that by Aing, accepting the offer, she would satisfy that desire, okay? And S's Aing was initiated in part by her own self-determining causal agent activity, agent-causal activity, which was a decision, right? That's what was going on. She decided, that's how it's initiated, and she accepts the offer. And this is concurrent with, and concurrent with the Aing, S continued to desire that B, all right? So the desire, the idea that this is how you fulfill the desire, all of that's going on. She intended that the Aing would satisfy that desire. And so this explains how you can have a reasons explanation that is coherent and conforms to the idea of agent causation. You're not messing with psychology. I mean, you're not doing anything that's outrageous here. O'Connor maintains it all fits together. And in fact, O'Connor's not only a philosopher, but he is a member of the cognitive sciences program at Indiana University, where he has taught for decades. And sorry, Tim, didn't mean to reveal your age at all there, but current science cannot possibly rule out indeterminacy in ordinary human actions. Okay, so that can't be ruled out by contemporary science, right? It's just not possible. We don't have any equipment or tools that could possibly do that. And it could be the future science confirms that there is indeterminacy in our action. You know, maybe we eventually get the tools to be able to measure things and to investigate these things, and we find out that there's indeterminacy. That's completely consistent with everything that we know about science, cognitive science, and certainly obviously consistent with O'Connor's theory of agent causation.